Good morning to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for Tuesday, August 26, 2025. Today, we're going to be focusing our attention on the Pacific because that's where all of the tropical activity is happening right now. The Atlantic is beginning to move into another slumber as we close out the month of August, and things are beginning to get active in the Pacific. But I'll explain towards the end why I do not think that this will last for long, and before you know it, we probably will start seeing more activity in the Atlantic again, but I'm going to show you that towards the end of the video. Let's start off with the National Hurricane Center homepage, though, and you can see we have quite an active tropical weather bulletin in the Pacific. We have Tropical Storm Juliette, which is at 70 miles per hour, so this is on the verge of becoming a hurricane. Minimum central pressure of 994 millibars. And it is located at 19.1 north and 116.5 west and moving northwest at 10 miles per hour. And let's really quickly look at the track for it. It's probably not going to become a hurricane, though. We'll only say a tropical storm and then probably disintegrate by the end of the week and stay well off the coast of Mexico. So any direct impacts, at least to Mexico right now, none of you guys have to worry. But we do have a few other areas of interest to watch. Besides Juliette, we have, curiously, another area here in the Central Pacific that we need to watch. And this has a moderate chance of development in the next week. And there's actually some model signals that we might get something to develop here in the Central Pacific. And we also have two other areas in the Eastern Pacific, one that has a 30% chance of development over the next week, and another one closer to the Mexican coastline that has a 20% chance. And if we're talking about any threats to impacts or any impacts and potential threats to Mexico, I would say that this is probably the number one area we should watch, given that it is obviously the closest out of these two other areas. But we'll obviously take a look at the models in just a little bit. And then really quickly, what's going on in the Atlantic? We have Tropical Storm Fernand down to 40 miles per hour, and this is on its way out. I'll show you the track really quickly. Gonna die by tomorrow evening, so not much any use to really talk about Fernand. And obviously, for now, and I say for now, there's nothing going on in the Atlantic besides Fernand. Here's a satellite image of the Pacific, and you can see quite a bit of activity. We have Tropical Storm Juliette here. Pretty decent tropical storm, although probably beginning to feel the impacts of less favorable conditions as you typically have in the Eastern Pacific the further north and west you go. So this is probably not going to strengthen much further. And once again, will probably die out by the end of the week. We have a pretty aggressive wave here or piece of energy. And this is probably one of the other two areas of interest in the Eastern Pacific that is marked. I think this is probably the 30% chance that's marked in the next 7 days. We also have another piece of energy here, and that's probably the one that we're going to have to watch closer to Mexico. But lots of activity here in the Pacific. And why is this happening? As I mentioned yesterday, the MJO is now becoming more favorable in the Pacific and less favorable in the Atlantic. This is the velocity potential chart, and this is, by the way, from Michael Ventress' website. And I'll continue to show this each and every single day to show you how the atmosphere is and why it is. And really, this is one of the biggest explaining factors. Lots of orange and yellow here in the Atlantic, which means that there is sinking motion in the atmosphere, and henceforth, things are not favorable in the Atlantic. But conversely, on the other hand, look at what we have here in the Pacific. A lot of rising air with these blue anomalies indicated. This is a favorable MJO that's situated in the Pacific right now, producing a lots of activity. And it's not even fully in the Eastern Pacific yet. As you can see, there's still actually somewhat sinking air in the Eastern Pacific. So this MJO pulse still has yet to move through the Pacific, and we're probably going to see things get active here, especially in the Eastern and Central Pacific in the next week. And in the meanwhile, things are going to remain quiet in the Atlantic, although, again, beyond the next week time frame, as we begin to head into next month, eventually, obviously, this MJO will move into the Pacific and through the Pacific and eventually make its way into the Atlantic. and I'll show you what we need to watch in the Atlantic beyond the next week. But obviously, the talk in the Pacific right now, or the main talk is in the Pacific right now, and you could see just from the 850 millibar vorticity map, we have a lot to go over. And there's a lot of signals and a lot of pieces of energy here that are all throughout the Pacific. Obviously, the one that stands out the most is the piece of vorticity here associated with Juliette, Tropical Storm Juliette. And this is the classic look that you want to see in a developing tropical or a tropical system, is a very round vorticity signature and very tight and very strong as well in terms of the measures of vorticity on the scale it has. So obviously this is indicative that obviously Juliette is a full-blown tropical system. And then we have some other pieces of vorticity here throughout the Pacific that kind of look like Juliette. We have this area here, and let's actually really quickly see, is that the area that the National Hurricane Center has mentioned? Yes, it is. That is the 2040 that the National Hurricane Center has mentioned, and then you can see we have a lot more energy here back to the east in the eastern Pacific, and these are probably the other areas that the National Hurricane Center is monitoring. So lots to go over in the Pacific right now. And obviously, on the meanwhile, in the Atlantic, we have our vorticity area with Fernand, although Fernand is on its way out. It's weakening, getting hit by a lot of shear and dry air, so this is not really relevant anymore. And then back here in the Eastern Atlantic, not much in terms of any organized activity. Probably a very strong or a very, potent tropical wave here, but obviously very broad and definitely not organized at all. Just east of the islands, and maybe we'll see some showers of thunderstorm activity move through. And you could also probably see what is the remnants of energy from Invest 99L, which is here in the central, almost southwestern Caribbean. But obviously that really poses no threat anymore for any potential development. I know I said a few days ago that maybe it's something we'll have to watch, but I don't think so at this point. I mean, as it entered the Caribbean, got absolutely shredded by those easterly winds that are very typical in the Eastern Caribbean, and all we have left is a bunch of energy that obviously is still prevalent in the Caribbean, but probably not going to develop. And if anything, we'll probably have to watch to see if it develops in the Pacific, which obviously, given that things are going to be favorable there for the next week, maybe it could indeed happen, but obviously things much less active in the Atlantic. And you could also relate that to, I mean, all of this is connected. The MJO, moisture, wind shear, and even pressure patterns, it is all connected with each other. And obviously, as we have a unfavorable MJO moving through, atmospheric conditions too as well, much less favorable in the MDR. Lots of dry air, especially in the mid-levels, especially here through the northern MDR, although I will say it is definitely less than, especially earlier this month or maybe last month. And obviously that is, it has to do with climatology too, that dry air and the Saharan air layer tends to move northward as we go on throughout the season. So dry air still there, but obviously less than probably would be earlier on in the season, but definitely enough that it's going to keep a lid on things, at least for the next several days. And obviously you still see the remaining moisture here in the Caribbean left from 99L, but that's obviously not going to do anything. And obviously it's because, again, things are less favorable in the Atlantic. And meanwhile in the Pacific, as I'll show you here with the European ensembles, because things are going to be favorable there, lots of activity to watch out there. In the next week to 10 days, the European ensembles showing all kinds of activity. Obviously, we have Juliette here. Then we have our other area here in the Central Pacific that might develop, but looks like it'll probably remain a weak storm. And then we have all kinds of activity here in the Eastern Pacific, and this is probably whatever ensemble members show development here off the southwest coast of Mexico in the Eastern Pacific. Maybe, as you can see by some of these ensemble members, maybe this area here, whatever develops closest to Mexico, might actually be of interest to Mexico. over the next week to 10 days. Some of the ensembles here showing that we might see a track just off the coast and then begins to turn northward and then northeastward as it gets to the Baja. And that's actually a pretty common track that we see here in September. Obviously, most of the activity that tends to happen in the eastern Pacific usually is all out to sea, moves on a west-northwestward track, straight westward, away from the coast of Mexico, although occasionally we have activity that ends up really, really close to Mexico and then just ends up going in. But especially as we get towards August and September, we tend to have more of a trough-type pattern, especially around the Baja and around the west coast of the United States. And because of that, we tend to see a lot more of a favorable pattern for recurves into the Baja of Mexico. So we'll see if whatever develops here in the next 7 days ends up doing that and ends up being a threat to Mexico. And obviously, especially since, as you can see, lots of activity going to happen here in the next week in the Pacific, and then conversely in the Atlantic, the European ensembles not showing much. But as we get into the end of this week and into next week, curiously enough, the ensembles are starting to show some sort of activity here with the tropical wave as we head into the month of September, since the month of September does begin next week on Monday. And obviously September is the peak month of the hurricane season after all, but right as the month of September happens next week, European ensembles are showing a pretty aggressive signal. Maybe that's a tropical wave that moves off the coast of Africa, and I do believe the European is not the only model showing something here. And again, we're heading into the month of September, and probably by this time, things are becoming a lot more favorable in the Atlantic, and whatever MJO pulse that's moving through the Pacific is probably beginning to make its way into the Atlantic as we get into early September. So this is why I say I do not think that the slumber in the Atlantic that we see right now will last for too long. Probably going to last a week to 10 days at most, and then we're going to start seeing activity here. Now, obviously, we can't be for sure that something will happen here, but I mean, just using common sense and using logic, that it's going to be September. MJO is probably going to start moving through, and things just typically start getting more favorable around this time in the Atlantic as we begin to head into the peak months and the peak month of the hurricane season, which is September. You can just imagine that something is probably going to happen, and we are starting to see the signals there in the long range on the European. So we'll see what happens, but obviously for now, mainly focusing on the Pacific, and I'll run through the GFS for you here in the Pacific Basin over the next week just to show you what happens, and quite a bit does happen. Obviously, we have Juliette, that, stays away from Mexico, moves in a northwesterly direction, and then eventually dies out as we head towards the end of the week, and kind of just stalls out here just off the coast of the Baja Peninsula, and then just dies away as it stalls out, probably because water temperatures definitely, as you head further northwest in the Pacific, are much cooler, so makes sense as to why it does that. And then we have more activity that happens beyond Juliette. We obviously have something else here, and then we have something else that develops closer to Mexico. So it looks like we'll probably get at least another 2 or so storms in the Pacific over the next week, maybe another 2 to 3 storms. And then meanwhile, in the Atlantic, obviously things are not favorable. So at least on the GFS, nothing is showing up in the next week. Looks like that signal that the European has of this tropical wave that moves off the coast of Africa, not showing up yet very strongly on the GFS, but obviously it is very far out. Things could change, and especially since it's August heading into September, we know how things can change very quickly in the tropics. And a week out too is a very, very long time when it comes to tracking the tropics. It's a week out is virtually in eternity. And so bottom line, what I'm trying to say is Do not expect things to stay the way they are right now. Even as we head towards the next week, things are probably going to change quite a bit. But obviously, enjoy the quiet while it lasts, especially in the Atlantic. And of course, for now, we're just going to be tracking stuff in the Pacific, as it looks like another burst of activity is about to happen there. With that being said, I'm going to end off for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. And as always, stay safe, and I'll be back with more tomorrow.